Well, hey everyone, thanks so much for joining us again today. What I want to do today is issue a challenge specifically to those of us who call ourselves Christians, to those of us who would say that we are church people. So, if you're not a Christian, or if you feel like I used to believe but I don't believe anymore, or you're not a church person, you don't want to be a church person, this is the perfect day for you, because what we're going to talk about is probably one of the reasons you resist being a Christian or you resist being a church person. So you just sit back, relax, and enjoy today, okay? For all of us who are Christians, for all of us who are church people, I want to issue a challenge to us, and the reason I issue it is because I think we play a key role in the ever-increasing complexity of the challenges that we're experiencing in our country, but maybe more importantly, even hitting closer to home, the challenges we're experiencing in our local community. So, let me start with this. Becoming a Christian is easy. It really is. I mean, you just tell me I have to trust in Jesus, he died and rose again to pay for my sins, that forgiveness is free, I just have to put my trust in him. Okay, that's easy. That's not complicated at all. Becoming a Christian is easy today. But interestingly enough, when you read the accounts of Jesus' life and when you read the writings of people like Paul and Peter and James and the other New Testament writers, they never once refer to themselves or refer to the other people who followed Jesus as Christians. They never once did. As a matter of fact, the people who called Christians were not Christians. They were the people who weren't Christians. They were the people who didn't follow Jesus, and they referred to them as Christians or referred to them as people who were associated with Christ in a very, very derogatory way. They were referring to them as Christians as, oh, there's another one of those people who are a part of that cult. That's how they thought about it. Now today, we know it means something very different. As a matter of fact, the term Christian has gotten watered down and changed quite a bit. Christian is a pretty safe term today. Christian is a really safe label. Christian basically means, oh, you believe in God? Yeah, I'm a Christian. You believe in Jesus? Oh, absolutely, I'm a Christian. Christian is one of those things, well, I believe some stuff, and so slap that label on me, I'm a Christian, I am good to go. But none of the early followers of Jesus referred to themselves or thought of themselves as Christians. They referred to themselves by a very, very different term. They called themselves Jesus followers. Now, what about the term Jesus follower? Well, this is way more challenging. This is way more challenging because it is crystal clear what Jesus would do in certain situations, isn't it? Now, if you start talking about following Jesus and acting like he would act, thinking like he would think, valuing what he valued, treating people the way he treated people, oh, well, there's not much ambiguity there. Now I know exactly what I should do. And this creates a little bit of tension for all of us Jesus followers who prefer just to think of ourselves as Christians. And the reason I say that is, again, becoming a Christian is easy. Becoming a Christian doesn't cost me anything. Sign me up for that. I'm all for the forgiveness. But following Jesus, well, that cost me something. Doing what Jesus would do in that situation, loving like Jesus would love, giving like Jesus would give, forgiving like Jesus would forgive, choosing not to engage in those conversations or to handle those conversations differently the way Jesus would, oh my goodness, well, that cost me something. And that's what I'm not sure I want to do. The reason it's going to cost you and me something to be a Jesus follower is because Jesus was the king who came to reverse the order of things. In other words, when Jesus showed up, he flipped everything upside down and said, no. I want to introduce a brand new value system, a brand new way of life, a brand new standard by which you are to live your lives. I want to give you one example of this. Matthew shares it with us. Matthew is one of Jesus' closest followers, and he was there for Jesus' most famous sermon. We call it today the Sermon on the Mount. You probably have heard of it. You may know parts of it. You may have even read a little bit of this. But here's how Matthew says it began. Matthew chapter 5, he says, now when Jesus saw the crowds, there's always a crowd around Jesus. When Jesus saw the crowds, he went up on a mountainside, which is why we call it the Sermon on the Mount, and he sat down, and his disciples, now here's a different term, not Christians, his disciples. This is what they often called themselves. His disciples came to him, and he began to teach them. Now, can you imagine what it would have been like to have been sitting on the hillside that day listening to this message from Jesus? I mean, this is extraordinary. This crowd of people, these disciples, they had no idea how lucky they were. They had no idea that they were listening to a message. They knew it was changing them. They knew it was turning their world upside down, but they had no idea they were listening to a message that was going to change the civilized world, a message that nobody argues, has shaped our Western civilization. So they're sitting there that day, and they're listening. When Jesus looks at them and says, hey, I want you to love your enemies. Oh, it's easy for you to love your friends. No. I want you to love your enemies. I want you to do good to those who hate you. I want you to pray for those who persecute you. This was so personal to them because they were experiencing this in their life, and they're thinking, are you kidding? Jesus says, no. This is a brand new way to live. Hey, this was the day Jesus said, where your money goes, your heart follows. So I want you to give generously, and I want you to give radically. Not just for the benefit of the you beside you that you're giving to, but also to do it because it benefits you. It changes your heart. Where your money goes, your heart follows. This was the day Jesus looked at them. And he said, you know what? No longer focus on worrying about and removing the speck from your brother's eye. Why don't you worry about the plank that's in your own eye before you deal with the speck in your brother's? Why don't you look in the mirror and you own your issues before you point out theirs? This was the day that Jesus looked at them and said, if you want to be right with God, you must be right with the people in your life. This was so revolutionary. As a matter of fact, Jesus went so far as to tell them, if you're standing in the temple in line and you're waiting to make your gift, your sacrifice, so that things will be right between you and God, and you've waited hours and hours because these lines would often be long. Jesus said, hey, imagine this. If you get up to the front of the line, you're 3 places away from getting your job done with God. And you remember that somebody has something against you or you have something against somebody, that there's a relationship that's not right. Jesus said, I want you to step out of that line. But we've waited all day. He said, yeah, it's okay. I want you to step out of that line. You leave your gift, your sacrifice there. You go find that person and you make things right. And then you come back and you can make things right with God. Because you can't be right with God if you're not right with others. You can't love God if you're not loving the people that he cares about. Now, that's just a summary of a few of the things. He goes on talking about how we should give, how we should pray, how we should treat one another and respect one another, how we should live with integrity. I mean, this is an extraordinary message. And then he wraps it up and he starts packing everything away and he starts making a trip. And as we're going to see in a minute, he was headed to Capernaum. But as he wraps up this message, Matthew tells us this. He says, when Jesus had finished saying these things, the crowds were amazed at his teaching because he taught as one who had authority. In other words, they're listening to him, and he's different than all the religious teachers of their day. They're looking at him and they're listening to him going, this man actually believes what he's teaching. This man is living out what he says he values. This is a man who practices what he preaches, it seems, by the passion, by the honesty, by the integrity with which he is teaching us. So Jesus packs it all up and he begins to head out of the temple towards Capernaum. And you can imagine what happens. This crowd, as he's leaving the temple area, leaving Jerusalem, this crowd begins to follow him. Matthew says, when Jesus came from the mountainside, large crowds followed him, and a man with leprosy came and knelt before him, which was a downer on the entire day. It was. As this man with leprosy came, probably a Jewish man, and he knelt before Jesus, the entire crowd scattered because nobody wanted to catch leprosy. The last thing they wanted to deal with on that day, with all the excitement of the teaching, they didn't want to have a downer of a leper showing up and infecting everybody. So they all scattered, but Jesus is right there. He never moves. And this leper, kneeling in front of him, looks up and says this. He says, Lord, if you're willing, you can make me clean. Lord, if you're willing, you can make me clean. And now the entire crowd is leaning in, keeping their distance, but leaning in, going, okay, is he really going to do what he says he's going to do? Is he really going to practice what he preaches? We just heard him talk about how you should be merciful, how you should be kind, how you should do good for those who cannot do good for you. We just heard him teach all these values, but is he going to do it with a Jewish leper? I mean, we're all socially distanced. We don't want to be close. What's he going to do? And here's what Matthew tells us. Jesus reached out his hand and touched the man. And he said to him, I'm willing, be clean. And immediately he was cleansed of his leprosy. And the crowd went wild. They've never seen anything like this. They have never seen a religious authority practice what they preach this way, live out what they value, align their behaviors with their beliefs. And here's a man who seems to be the real deal. Now, for all the excitement, for all the euphoria, for all the joy over this man is different, the mood is about to change dramatically. And the reason the mood's about to change dramatically is because as Jesus enters Capernaum, he's about to encounter someone very, very different. Now, Matthew doesn't tell us that the mood changes, and the reason he doesn't tell us is because everybody who was reading this document in the first century, this account, they would have known the mood changed immediately, okay? It was just given. They understood because they knew exactly what the crowd would have been thinking that day. So here's what Matthew tells us happens. When Jesus had entered Capernaum, a centurion came to him asking for help. And immediately the crowd thinks, oh, no. Oh, no. You're not going to help him. There's no way you're going to help him, Jesus. This would have created so much anger and so much frustration in this crowd, just the sight of this centurion man. Now, let me give you a little backstory and a little context to help you understand why. About 100 years before this interaction takes place, there was a Roman general by the name of Pompey who marched right into Jerusalem. He marches right into the temple, and he desecrates the temple. He had to use some Roman muscle to do it, but he gets all of the priests moved aside, and he marches right into what they called the Holy of Holies. And the reason he marched into the Holy of Holies is because he has heard all about this Jewish God who says he's the one true God, there's no other God. And he wants to see for himself exactly what this Jewish God is like. So he marches into this Holy of Holies, a place that only the high priest would enter once a year. And this unclean Roman pagan general walks right in there to the dismay of all the Jewish priests. He rips the curtain open. And to his disappointment, he doesn't find God. He doesn't even find an idol of God. All he sees is a golden table, some candlesticks, a few pieces of gold. And he just shrugs his shoulders, walks out, but not without taking some things, specifically, among other things. Took a few thousand Jewish people as slaves, and he carried them off to Rome. And that was the day that, for all intents and purposes, the Jewish people lost their freedom again. They had lost it before in their history, but now they're losing it again, and they're being assimilated into the Roman Empire. Several years pass. Another Roman general by the name of Crassus shows up. He marches into the temple, and he takes all the Jewish wealth out of the temple, steals it all, takes it all back to Rome. Fast forward a little further, in 40 BC, the Roman Senate crowns a man maybe you've heard of. They crown Herod the Great king of the Jews. The problem? Herod's not a Jew. Herod hates the Jews. And Herod brings persecution and suffering on the Jews as he reigns over them all throughout this region. And then, when Jesus is in his 20s, the Roman Senate appoints as governor of the region a man by the name of Pontius Pilate. Pontius Pilate hates the Jews as well. He inflicts so much violence and suffering on the Jews. Pontius Pilate was the Roman who first introduced crucifixion to that region of the world. Matter of fact, Pontius Pilate was so violent with the Jews that eventually the Roman Senate recalled him back to Rome. He got in trouble. Imagine this. How far would you have to push the Roman Empire to be too violent? Well, that's how far Pontius Pilate pushed it, because he got recalled to Rome because he was too violent against the Jews. And eventually, Pontius Pilate committed suicide. So, with all of that backstory, these Jewish people are standing in front of a centurion who is not one of them. A centurion who represents the Roman Empire and the Roman power that has brought so much suffering over decades and decades and decades in their country to their people. It's a Roman centurion who earned his rank and authority through violence and suffering. That's why he got promoted, because he was the best at it. And he could keep his soldiers in line through violence and suffering. This was a centurion who probably wasn't a natural-born Roman citizen. It was a centurion who was probably, he'd become a Roman citizen because he was from one of the surrounding regions around Israel. And if you know much about your history, you know this. Back in the first century, the people in the regions around Israel, they hated the Jews. They believed the Jews were a detestable race. They wanted nothing to do with them. The Jews wanted nothing to do with them. I mean, it was great turmoil. It was serious suffering. There was major animosity between them. So here is a man standing in front of this Jewish crowd, standing in front of Jesus, who is a physical representation of all the turmoil, all the pain, all the suffering, all the violence that their people are experiencing and have experienced. Here's a man who is responsible. He is the physical representation of the fact that they don't have their freedom. And they hate him. They hate him with everything in them. They hate him with every fiber of their being. And this man has shown up and is asking Jesus for help. He's asking for a favor. You ever been there? I think we all have. Somebody betrays you, somebody doesn't, disappears on you, somebody doesn't finish well, somebody leaves you hanging, and then they turn right around a few months later, a few years later, they ask you for a job recommendation, and you're thinking, are you kidding me? After what you did, after our history together, you think I'm going to give you a good job recommendation? Somebody asks to borrow money, and you're thinking, again? Because last time I loaned you money, you still hadn't paid me back for that. But I've been watching, and I saw that trip you went on, and I saw the money you spent on that car, and I saw what you did there. But you hadn't found the money to pay me back yet? Now you got the nerve to ask again? Oh, you want me to help you with this? Well, you're acting like that never even happened. You ever been there? You ever had somebody ask you for a favor, ask you for help, and you thought, you've got no right. Who do you think you are? How could you have so much nerve as to ask for that after what you have done to me? You see, I think all of us are for helping strangers who are in need. But helping an offender who we've got a history with, that seems a little too much, doesn't it? Well, that is the situation. As this centurion stands in front of Jesus and he asks for help. Specifically, here's what he said. Lord, my servant lies at home paralyzed, suffering terribly. To which I'm sure the crowd went, oh, now you care. Oh, your servant who clearly you need because he does something for you that you don't want to do for yourself. Oh, your servant's suffering terribly, so now you care about somebody suffering? What about all the suffering we've been through? What about all the suffering you have inflicted on us? Now you care? I mean, the nerve of this guy to even ask a Jew for help. And so they're looking at Jesus thinking, okay, well, practicing what you preach, we're all for that. And living out these values you just taught us, well, absolutely. And loving your enemies, well, yeah, to some extent, but this goes too far. This crosses the line. This person deserves to get what they've got coming. This person deserves a rant from you, Jesus. You set him straight. And instead, Jesus says this, shall I come and heal him? In other words, Jesus looks back at the centurion and says, you mean to go ahead and come to your house and take care of it? You have to understand, this is the moment, Jesus' response here, where he could either possibly gather more momentum, gain a larger crowd, or his response can cause him to lose the crowd, to lose all the patriots surrounding him, to lose all the working class who have suffered at the hands of this centurion and the Roman powers. And he chooses, in spite of that, to look at this man who did not deserve anything and say, you may come to your house? I'll just go ahead and walk in your house. Whoa, wait a minute, Jesus. Jews don't associate with Gentiles. Jews never enter the house of a Gentile, even a good Gentile, much less one that's this evil. You can't do that, Jesus. He says, yeah, I'll walk in your house. And the centurion responds this way. He says, Lord, I don't deserve to have you come under my roof. To which all of the Jews in the crowd said, okay, we do agree on that. You definitely don't deserve for him to come under your roof. He should never set foot in your house. Okay, we're on the same page there. But then the centurion looks at Jesus and says, I know what it's like. We're similar in some ways. Because just like you, Jesus, if you'll just say the word, my servant will be healed, because I myself am a man under authority, just like you are, Jesus, with soldiers under me, and I'll tell this one go and he goes, and that one come and he comes. And I say to my servant, do this, and he does it. So Jesus, you don't need to come under my roof. You don't need to come to my house, because I've got authority like you've got authority, and I just tell my servants what to do, and I don't have to be there. They just do it. So Jesus, how about this? How about you just say the word? And I think you've got enough authority that my servant will be healed. You never even have to see him. And you know what Jesus does? Jesus pauses, and he commends this evil inflictor of suffering Roman centurion. Get this, for his faith. As a matter of fact, Jesus looks at him and says, this is unbelievable. This is amazing. I have yet to find such great faith among any of the Jews in Israel. Imagine how that landed with the Jewish crowd. And then Matthew tells us he did this. Verse 13, Jesus said to the centurion, go, let it be done just as you believed it would. And his servant was healed at that moment. And the crowd looked at each other and said, I can't believe it. Jesus, if you keep reading, marched right on to Peter's home for lunch. Meanwhile, the crowd is going, okay, I wouldn't have done it. I'm not even sure I like that he did it. But there's a man who lives out what he values. There's a man who practices what he preaches. There's a man whose beliefs shape his behavior. Now, why do I bring this up? Well, here's why I think this is so challenging for all of us who call ourselves Christians. We slap that label on for all of us who consider ourselves to be church people. I think we have to recognize and understand that it's easier to be a Christian than a Jesus follower. It just is. It's easy to slap the label Christian on. It's easy to say, well, I believe. Oh, yeah, I believe. And then not do anything. In our culture, in our community at least, come on, it's safe to be a Christian. Everybody is a Christian, it feels like. So I'll say I'm a Christian. That doesn't mean I have to change my behaviors. I'll say I'm a Christian, but I can choose how I want to live. I'll say I'm a Christian, but then I'm going to choose how I treat you based on what you do to me. I say I'm a Christian, but that doesn't have to change my actions at all. It's just a label I slap on. Well, yeah, it's easy to be a Christian. It's easy to pray a prayer and put your trust in Jesus and ask for his forgiveness and then go on about your life and not worry about whether what you're doing aligns with what God asked you to do. It's a whole lot easier to be a Christian than to be a Jesus follower. Because being a Jesus follower, suddenly what I should do becomes crystal clear because I know what Jesus would do in my situation. Man, being a Jesus follower, that means I got to be for that person and love that person that I disagree with. Being a Jesus follower, that means I don't treat a political party like they're my savior. And I'm not going to put my opinions and my views above you. Well, being a Jesus follower means I'm not going to create division because I have an opinion about this and you have one about this. I land on this side of this issue and you land on that side. Because that's not what Jesus would do. Being a Jesus follower, that's a lot harder. Well, I know exactly what Jesus would do. He would reach a hand across the aisle. He would walk right over the divide to the other side. That's what Jesus would do. I mean, I can be a Christian and then I can rant all I want to rant about the things that I don't like in the world. But if I'm going to be a Jesus follower, well, I should only be ranting about the things Jesus ranted about. And best I can tell, the only thing he ranted about was the self-righteousness of religious people. That's the thing that got under his skin. That was the greater sin. So let's be honest, it's a lot easier to be a Christian and then live any way we want to live. To believe and not do anything we don't want to do. It's easier to do good for a stranger than an offender, isn't it? It just is. Stranger, I don't have any history with a stranger, so I'm for you and I'll do good for you. But that person I've got a history with, I've got too much of a history. The wounds are still fresh. I still remember the last time they hurt me. And now I've got an opportunity to do good, and I just don't want to do good. Now I've got an opportunity to forgive, and I just don't want to cancel the debt. Now I've got an opportunity to serve them, but why would I ever serve them? I don't know, maybe because that's what Jesus did, but it's a lot easier to do good for a stranger than an offender. It's a lot easier to love people who look like me, think like me, live like me, and agree like me. It's much easier to do this. Oh yeah, you agree with me? Okay, we're good. I love you. It's a lot easier to post things on social media that I know are going to get likes from all the people who look, think, live, and agree with me. And then anybody who disagrees, I'll just tell them what an idiot they are. Well, it's a lot easier to have a conversation with somebody who looks, thinks, lives, and agrees with me. Oh, absolutely. We're going to be on the same page. But that person across the hall, that person in the next office, that person who views things differently, what is wrong with them? I'm not loving them. Listen to what they say. Look at how they live. Look at what they think. No. They're wrong. I'm just so certain I'm right. I'm not going to reach across the aisle. I'm not going to stretch a hand to the other side. I'm not going to do that. It's a lot easier. Now, here's the thing for all of us who are Christians. It may be easier to just slap the label Christian on ourselves and move on. But it also causes a lot of problems. As a matter of fact, when we say we follow Jesus, when we say, oh yeah, I love Jesus, yes I do, but it's no more than a label we slap on ourselves of Christian and it doesn't impact our behavior, then we contribute and we are complicit to all the problems in our country and in our community. As a matter of fact, when we just slap on the label Christian and we don't actually follow Jesus, we lose our credibility, we lose our influence. We look like hypocrites because we are hypocrites. We are. And then we make things worse, not better. What our community needs right now are not a bunch of Christians. That's actually part of our problem. We got a community full of people who call themselves Christians, but they are living and acting in ways that are nothing like Jesus. What we need are more Jesus followers. What we need are more people who do what Jesus did, and even when it's hard, and even when it's uncomfortable, and even when it's inconvenient, and even when it's going to cost us something, we will align our actions with our values. We'll align our behaviors with our beliefs. We will practice what we preach. If we had more of that in our communities would be a better place. It would. It's easy to believe and do nothing. Listen, it's easy to say, I believe everybody has equal value, dignity, and worth. It's easy to say, I believe red, yellow, black, and white, they're all precious in His sight. It's easy to say, oh, I believe God's for people and God loves everybody. It's easy to say what we believe. But if that's all we do, then we have been complicit in the very problems that we say we want to change or want to see changed. As a matter of fact, if believing is all we do, then we will not act and we will not respond. And our communities will be worse, not better for it. You see, the followers of Jesus who make the greatest difference in the world are not the ones who are right. They are the ones who act and respond when something isn't right. The followers of Jesus, the Christians, if you want to use that term, who make the greatest difference in this world, are not the ones who just believe they're right. They're the ones who respond and act when they see something that isn't right, when they see something that isn't in line with this extraordinary value system Jesus introduced to the world. They respond and they act when they see anything out of line with the Jesus who came to introduce an order to this world that would reverse everything. When Christians choose to align our behaviors and our actions with those values, everything gets better. So, Jesus did not invite anyone to be a Christian. Don't believe me? Go read the gospel accounts. Never once did he say, come be a Christian, come be a Christian. That wasn't language he used. Jesus invited people to be disciples. Jesus invited people to be followers. Becoming a Christian is easy. It doesn't cost you anything. And for some of you, you have settled at that. You have slapped a label on you and you're living any way you want to live. And you're saying, well, I'm good, I'm a Christian. No. That's not what Jesus invited you to do. Jesus didn't invite us to that because becoming a Christian is easy. It doesn't cost you anything. But following Jesus, well, it's going to cost you something. But following Jesus will also lead to the change that we most want to see in this world. So, don't settle for Christian.